Hello. Howdy, as someone might say. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, Pommie.
How are you?
Good.
Excellent. This is Lisa Caprini Sthalekar. Hot Sthalekar. To me, not necessarily to anybody else. Yeah, you say you're fine. Haven't done this in a while, have we?
No, we haven't hung out for a while.
Yeah, this is it. We're just hanging out, and I'm gonna get her to kind of tell everybody about herself and other things.
Maybe we should start by explaining what hot Sthalekar is.
You can explain if you want.
Okay. So the first time I met this man was 2015. First opportunity to do commentary with the IPL. And that was the time when there was 4 crews, and we literally hung out for 2 months with that one crew, which was excellent, I thought. And it meant that you actually built some really good friendships. So I was with Pommie and Danny Morrison, 2 completely different, opposite type of people,
Okay.
but wonderful friends. Anyway, there was a part of the sponsorship was the Hot Star. And a couple of times we had to present it ourselves. So one of us would go down and be there. So anyway, that's how it got to set a Hot Star, Sthalekar, Hot Sthalekar. So that's where it is.
Yeah. She had to be part of the presentation party and present it to
Yeah.
somebody. I can't even remember what it was for, the Hot Star
knows?
Prize. Yeah, anyhow, yeah. On presentations and all the rest, move along. Tell me something. Why cricket?
Cricket actually wasn't my first sport. Tennis was my first sport, my first passion. I had posters of Steffi Graf and Stefan Edberg and Boris Becker and that generation.
Yeah.
Tennis was my first passion, where I got private coaching and I started to get into rep squads, and I wanted to win Wimbledon, just like everyone else does, right? And cricket was my fun sport, the sport with my mates, social. But probably around the age of 15, tennis got quite bitchy, and I didn't enjoy it as much. I found being an event for a single athlete, or even if you have doubles, your doubles partner in the end becomes, the one that you play next weekend in a singles match. So there wasn't that kind of bond or friendship that I liked that cricket had. So at the age of 15, I kind of changed my tact and went cricket. But cricket originally was a sport that my father loved, born and bred here in Mumbai, where we are. It's in the blood. So I used to go and play with my father out the backyard.
Okay, and then kind of with teams and with everybody else, or was that just school and all the way through?
School cricket was obviously just for boys, but because I kind of enjoyed the game, playing in the backyard, and then my father used to take us to the SCG, so I remember kind of coming back and saying, well, I want to play cricket. And he said, well, girls don't play cricket, right?
Dad said that?
Yeah, Dad said that. And I said, but I see all of these kids playing every weekend. He goes, they're all boys. So I actually hadn't noticed that there were no girls there. I just saw kids my own age playing cricket, and I wanted to play. So thankfully, my father made some phone calls to the local clubs, and it was West Pennant Hills, Cherrybrook. And they said, look, she can come down to the trials for under 10s. She'll be the only female if she's okay with that. We're happy to kind of have her involved.
Right. Because what I would like to know about is, not exclusively, but what I'd like everyone else to know about is not exclusively women's cricket. More than that, I'd like just the journey in the game, and I can't unlink those two, right? Because your journey effectively then is that. Start off with that struggle of boys play cricket, not girls, and how how you kind of navigate that.
I remember turning up to the first kind of training session, and you're all brave and excited, and then as soon as you see everyone, you're like, nah, I'm tapping out here.
It was a good idea at the time.
Yeah, but now that I'm here, Dad, no, I don't think so. But thankfully, he kind of just pushed me and said, no, let's do this. You want to do this? So I was lucky that I had a coach and a manager who were obviously the two fathers of the two boys that were very supportive. And I happened to be okay at cricket. I remember the first game that I actually played, first competitive game of cricket, I picked up a wicket with my first delivery.
All right.
So that probably helps my teammates going, great, now I can tease my mates that are on the other side that have gotten out by a girl.
Oh, right.
So there was a huge advantage for them. But I actually played 6 years with the same team. So I had good friendship with the guys, even though there was new faces always coming in, but there was kind of a core group, and they enabled me to find my way in the game of cricket. Like, they decided maybe Lisa should be a spin bowler. I didn't really know what I was, or I didn't really turn the ball. I got opportunities to bat, so I wasn't like fielding from fine leg to fine leg and not getting a couple of overs and batting right down the order. I was actually being given opportunities to develop my game. So I'm very thankful to the coach and the manager for kind of supporting me. And I think the coach's son, his name's Todd Twining, he was the captain. And yeah, they were very supportive. And I think if I didn't have that opportunity, I wouldn't have gone through failures, got hit in the head, got stitches above my, go through those kind of experiences and go, right, let me find a way to navigate out of that and become better.
All right. Any of all of them boys that you were playing with who went on to higher honors, not necessarily 18 and 19 and 20 post school, but maybe district or at 11, 12s, 13s before you kind of finished school?
Yeah, they were all there was probably about 3 guys that were playing in the rep sides.
Right.
And I think a couple of them went on to play like 2nd or 3rd grade cricket, and then obviously got married, work, kids, took over. I crossed paths with Todd Twining probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and he was bringing his son, I think it was, for the test match, because they have the kids that go out
and play in the middle.
Yeah, and his son was doing that. So
nice.
He caught me. I was running, I think, or doing some commentary or something. He stopped me and he said, I don't know if you remember. I'm like, yeah, I remember you. And I said,
you were nice to me.
Yeah. I told the son, I said, I played with your father for a long time and we had a lot of fun.
All right. That's really cool, actually. So now tell me about your awareness and when it kind of turns up off the greater difficulty from a women's cricket perspective and trying, 1, to, I suppose, just get more game time, 2, get more air time, 3, get what is warranted and shouldn't have to be discussed recognition. And considering that I go Belinda Clark, Mel Jones, and then your era, essentially, right? So there are those that come before. So when do you become aware of the fact that there is this thing, where, we're not quite getting a go here,
So I came into probably the Australian side and the setup in the late 90s. In the Australian squad, couldn't quite break into the Australian team, broke into that side in 2001. And integration happened at the ICC level in 2005. So from there, it was a knock-on effect. It happened to the national governing bodies, and then it happened to states or counties, territories. So that was where the change happened, in the sense of better access to grounds, facilities, a little bit more money within the game. Didn't have to pay to play for my country, whereas my former teammates had to. So yeah, that was a significant change, a significant moment in our game. But then there was a period of time where integration happened, but nothing was happening, right? The initial, okay, great. So now you're part of, let's say, Cricket Australia, or back then I think it was Australian Cricket Board. You'll wear the same uniforms as the guys, all of that. But we were getting uniforms that were 10 sizes too big.
You're getting boys' uniforms.
Yeah. It was just the hand-me-downs almost.
Yeah.
Excess stock, here you have it.
We'll just make extra.
Yeah. And it's like, no, we've got slightly different bodies.
Only a little bit different.
Yeah, slightly different. So there was that period probably in the late 2000s where we felt things weren't moving as it should. We understand integration happened. There was a little bit of an uplift, and then it just went flatline from there. So that was probably the first time. And Belinda Clark and Karen Rolton was still around, but Catherine Fitzpatrick, that kind of generation had already retired. So it was now my generation that was in the senior roles within the team. So we kind of thought, and that we caught wind of a players' association. We weren't part of that. We were all still working full time, trying to fit in camps, tours. I mean, back then we only had one tour, maybe 2 tours a year if we were lucky, and the tour was always to New Zealand, so it wasn't like we're flying very far or things like that. So that was probably when we decided, okay, how can we take the game to another level? So there was a couple of things that happened. Belinda Clark, who was in charge of women's cricket at CA, kind of brought us all in and said, look, we think T20 cricket might be the vehicle to promote women's cricket, to get it televised, broadcast, because if you play double headers, the infrastructure's already there from a broadcast point of view, not excess costs, and all of a sudden we can get you playing, and then maybe at some points the remuneration will be coming in, commercial dollars might come in. So there was a buy-in from the playing group to play T20 cricket. But then there was also, so within an organisation you have different pockets, so high performance, you have marketing, commercial, all of those type of things. Commercial and marketing didn't like the fact that there was double headers because it takes away from the short, sharp nature of the game.
Right.
And I remember distinctly there was Australia versus India, and we were to play a double header against England. And for quite a while it was spoken about, but then nothing was happening. So Karen Rolton, who was the captain, and myself, I was a vice captain, we actually started to speak to a few board members going, what's going on? So they kind of pushed it from a board point of view to say this needs to happen, because at the time, the senior management within CA didn't really want the double headers. And that happened to be Elise Perry's first game in T20 cricket. We played in front of close to 30,000 by the time the crowd came in. Our scores were higher than what India posted in the T20 game, so our game was more competitive. And that was kind of the start of, okay, how can we make this work between both having men's and women's cricket being played at the same ground, and we started to see T20 World Cups.
At least Perry starts off in front of 30,000 fans and thinks this is how it is, this is how this goes, or what?
Well, I mean, her first tour was a top-end tour up in Darwin where there was probably about 5 people. So that was ODI cricket. So she went from up in Darwin to the MCG with 25,000, 30,000 there. And she's had to wait a long time to play in front of a packed MCG crowd back in the T20 World Cup final in 2020.
Yeah, the dance on the stage stuff. Yeah. I remember all those dances. Okay, so I like how you've gone to Elise Perry, and let's involve the sisterhood, if I can call it that.
Yeah, are you Greg Matthews? He calls it the sisterhood, the brotherhood, the sisterhood.
No,
the brothers and the sisters need to hang out a bit more.
No, I'm trying to kind of use it as it's supposed to be used as a word. But what I mean by that is not just Australia. Yourself, um, Indian women, England women, as the first three, I guess, as the biggest three countries in terms of cricket. One really big one, the other ones maybe not so much, right? And the continual sort of battle. I remember actually, I think it was 2016, where one time at the back of a comms box, yourself, Mel Jones, Isha Guha, and I don't remember if Anjum Chopra was there at the back of the box.
Yeah.
But in a certain discussion that you were having, because a game was going badly, a women's T20 game at a World Cup was going badly. And I remember that being sort of a time where you want more recognition, and then the game's not going so well, which you can't help. I mean, it happens in men's cricket. You think this should happen, that should happen, and it doesn't. The game is just the game. But it showed me kind of a desperation for a justification of self, of the game, of the women's game, and all the rest. How that went in all your conversations about how to take it forward, FICA, everything else.
Yeah. I guess as the broadcast of the women's game increased, every time the game was being put on TV, we were trying to sell the game. We were trying to bring in new audience. The players were certainly aware of that. So a certain style, certain scores had to be displayed. Otherwise, if that was the one chance one person flicked over and saw the game and went, actually, why am I watching this?
Right.
They would make that judgment for the entirety of their life, potentially, about the game. So that's a fan lost.
Right.
So I think there's limited opportunities, how to maximize that the most. And the problem that we were facing at that time, around 2016, was still the amateur nature of the sport. So we are asking players, and the same thing could be said about Test cricket when we broadcast women playing Test cricket. They don't play any multi-format domestic competitions to get them ready, yet we're asking them on the world stage in front of cameras, about 30 odd cameras, to get it right and make it interesting, please. And you've had no practice at it. So the same thing was being asked back then, as the game kind of shifted from just a hobby, a passion, something that you wanted to achieve personally, to, okay, this is now an amateur sport. Now it's semi-professional. And now, thankfully, we're in a position where majority of international teams are fully contracted. So that struggle probably in 2016 was, okay, I think that was the last time the T20, both the men's and women's T20 World Cups were played at the same time. And it was here in India. And then we knew 2 years later we were going all out on our own. So it had to be good. We had to see that progression. Thankfully, there was a couple of countries, England, Australia, India, New Zealand to a certain extent as well, that invested money in the women's game, and gave the players an opportunity to train more, play more. And probably the International Women's Championship, which at that time was 8 teams, there were bilaterals being played. So back when I played, I only played a bilateral series against England, New Zealand and India. So I never met a South Africa until a World Cup, or a Sri Lanka, or an Ireland. Whereas now those teams are playing regularly and playing regular cricket, and now we're seeing those teams. South Africa has emerged as a side that is now playing Test cricket as well.
Change as it happens, whilst you're sort of trying to make it happen, is never quick enough, right? Certainly doesn't feel like that. But when it happens to you, it's sudden, right? And that's kind of just how life works, I guess. You've been there for a lot of the ride, and in your various capacities. So like as player, youngster, turn up in a team, and then captain of a team and senior player for a long time, and then franchises and, play with opposition people, and then now coach and, all the rest. Talk to me about that progression. If you can reflect and say, do you know what? This has been slow, this has been fast, this is kind of even paced. If we think about it, if I think back to 1998, 99, and then I think, to 2024, it's actually,
Well, when you think of the first Test match that was played between two countries for women's cricket, it was 90 years ago. And back then they actually had some decent crowds as well. So we kind of fell off. We started, things were good, kind of fell off, disappeared into oblivion. No one knew that women's cricket existed. And everything probably changed around that integration, and then probably in the 2012, 13, 14, 15, around those years, remuneration started to come into players. Since then, it's accelerated really quickly. So I'll give you an example. I retired in 2013 from the Australian side. At that time, I was the number one contracted player. I got paid $15,000 a year. And now the number one contracted player, I don't know exactly the amount, but let's say with the WPL that's played here in India, Ashley Gardner, who was the highest sold overseas players, got sold for 550,000 Australian dollars for 3 weeks' work. So that gives
so your contract you're talking about is an Australian contract.
Yeah.
So what would, just relative numbers, would it be 15 and 150 in Australia? Would it be 15 and a million in Australia?
It would be up over 500,000-600,000
for a contracted Australia player.
And that includes their WBBL and it doesn't include other franchises.
Yeah, so it doesn't include the 500,000. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So it's still
a huge increase.
Yeah, a lot.
And the amount of cricket that they're playing now is a lot. So it's interesting having a discussion with players like Elisa Healy, who was a teammate of mine. She said it's fascinating to watch a group of players, mature players, all of a sudden have to relearn being a professional player, because they had probably a very great balance of, okay, we go away for 1 or 2 tours and then we come back, we do a couple of camps, and we've got state cricket, we're playing every game of state cricket, whereas now the Australian contracted players don't play any state cricket, very rarely. They only play the WBBL. And they're on the road a lot. So as mature adults or mature athletes, they've got to get used to being on the road for a long period of time. And so that transition has caused some players a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety, put in that 2 or 3 years of COVID bubbles. And, that certainly took its toll on a lot of players. And we've probably lost a few players along the way, but I've always felt, as you kind of make this jump from amateur sport to semi-professional to professional, there will be some players that fall off, that can't keep up with the pace or want to go down a different path. You can't begrudge them doing that. But the next generation don't need to worry about work, so to speak, financial work to ensure that they can pay mortgages, bills, food, all that type of stuff.
Nice segue into women's cricket more than men's sport. I should say women's sport. Quite obviously, actually, more than men's sport is kind of a kind of social. How can I put it?
There's more to it.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is if you're struggling as women's cricket to try and get recognition, there is a sort of holistic societal sort of quest as the athletes and people that I don't know if you feel this way or not, that along the way has changed everybody, has changed society to become more wholesome and not so much pigeonholed, role kind of definition and assignment being wrong or engendered, as it were.
Yeah.
That whole story, you said younger ones now, as they take up the game, don't have to think about work per se, right? They don't have to think about other work because this is work, right? For many sports people, they turn up, they work as in play sport, and once they finish, they kind of live off that and everything that sort of comes off that. Does the world become a better place for women's cricket, for women's sport? Is there this discussion amongst the women as they're in change rooms and kind of look at the bigger picture of what would be described as a patriarchal world that they're trying to navigate?
Yeah. I'd say the players that have come from the semi-professional and now are professional see the bigger picture because they've lived it. They've experienced it. I think I look at Australia because that's where I live and I've grown up. When I was growing up, I used to be called a tomboy. But I reckon that is almost gone out of the vernacular because it's actually cool to be a sporty female because all of a sudden there are so many opportunities for you. And we recently had the Women's Football World Cup in Australia and Colombia versus Nigeria was being sold out. Do you know what I mean? Countries that I didn't think had popularity in our country, everyone was going because it was an event, right? It was something that you didn't want to miss out. You didn't want to say, you heard this kind of swell of how this event was changing the perception of women's sport, and you didn't want to be the one person that didn't go, right? So every game was sold out, and we're starting to see that across the world with different competitions. I think, is it the Women's Basketball League now? They're getting their own charter flights to make it easier to get to and from their games, and so things are changing. And I think also the catalyst for that was also the national governing bodies realizing that for such a long period of time they were only focusing on half of the population. Now, if the sport wants to grow and gain more commercial dollars, more viewers, more fans, then you've actually got to appeal to the other half of the population. And I think once you put it as simply as that, a few people at the decision-making table probably went, oh, okay, well, let's do this then. So we're starting to see almost... James Sutherland, who was the former CEO of Cricket Australia, he basically said, we've probably discriminated women for close to 100 years. It's now time to change that, to shift that. So you can't always... So the argument used to be, well, not many people are watching the game. It's like, but you haven't actually invested in it. You haven't given it a chance. So, there was a shift by certain people to go, okay, well, let's invest and then see where we land.
Build it and they'll come.
Yes.
That's how it goes, right?
I don't know if I answered your question. Did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
Well, I don't think it was so much a question as a kind of a probing into what the thought process is. And this as well is, as we sort of finish, we never finish.
It's always going.
Yeah. Comparison, I say to the kids, I say to my kids all the time, comparison is the killer. Right? Do you know where I'm going with that? Do I have to ask a question? If I say that, is there enough there for you to sort of grab onto?
Oh, yeah, there's enough there.
Yeah?
I think you can't compare an apple and an orange. You've commentated on the women's game. It's played slightly differently, right? We don't have the brute force, albeit there's some players that are managing to hone that kind of element into their game, but there's a little bit more skill and technique and tactics that are involved. And I'm finding actually a lot of male viewers are enjoying that aspect because sometimes they get a little bit disheartened. Back then when a Kyron Pollard could come and blast 30 odd runs off and over and change the course of the game, whereas the games tend to be a little bit closer, albeit IPL is completely different, always goes down to the last over, the last ball for some reason. There is that issue of that comparison, because women will never be as strong. Where the comparison can work in favour of women's cricket happened in the last 50 over World Cup in New Zealand, and Elisa Healy scored 170 in a World Cup final. And so we kept putting up the graphic that was the highest score by a female cricketer in a World Cup final. And I said, but where is that compared to the men's game? And in the end, she beat Adam Gilchrist. I think he scored 150 odd. So we put that graphic up, and people are like, oh, but we shouldn't compare. And I said, but this is where you can, because the World Cup final is the same. It means the same for the players, right? It's what you work towards every 4 years, and you're in a precious situation to win for your side. So in terms of having an outstanding innings, that should be compared, I think, but not necessarily the skill set, because how you get to the 170 and the 150 is completely different. But to actually achieve that milestone in a very similar situation, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, no doubt impressive. Apples with apples, I think, is what you is what you said at the start, right? And there'll be many out there who go, oh, well, should you or shouldn't you, or whatever it is. And to be perfectly honest, you can do what you want. It doesn't
We
really...
can't stop you.
Yeah, nobody's going to stop you doing whatever you want. But context, I think, is always going to be important. And I think what I'm angling at all the time is that men aren't in competition against women, and women aren't in competition against men. And so, and this is true of society, right? Not that it plays out like that, but both must coexist. And it's better if there is an effort to do so, accepting differences and moving along, as simple as that. If there was one thing you could change in the game of cricket, now you could go one thing in women's cricket, or you could go one thing in cricket in general, you can go one thing in men's cricket that you could change. What is it? Is there something?
Okay, so I'll start with the men's game.
Oh, there's a lot.
Because there is a lot.
Oh, yeah? Oh, I didn't know. I'm just asking.
No. The one thing that I would like to see happen in the men's game is that there's proper scheduling windows.
Okay.
To allow T20 franchises, bilateral cricket and ICC events to coexist.
Okay.
But how do you put the genie back in the bottle? That's the real question. So don't know the answer, but that's what I'd like to see. From the women's point of view, the women's game, it's two things. First thing is that I think at the moment the national side of most countries is being well looked after, getting good opportunities. But it's important that the next tier, that bigger base where you're going, that will be funneled into the national side, that they are given the appropriate facilities, competitions, remuneration to be able to work on their game to be better. And then the other thing is from a commercial point of view, and more so, this is, England have probably done really well, and so has BCCI in staging their international games at big venues and promoting that and trying to sell out the crowd. Whereas in Australia, we have been happy to be at boutique grounds, cute, nice,
cozy.
all
those words that I used to say small.
Yeah. So there's been a big push now at CA and through the Players Association as well to actually go to bigger venues. So you won't know until you try. I mean, I remember when they announced that the MCG would host the final of the T20 World Cup in 2020 on Women's International Day, and I was like, surely we could pick a smaller venue. I mean, it's like 90,000. Like,
your stomach goes a little bit.
Everyone was very hesitant and reluctant about it. But what they did was, for a period of 4 or 5 years, they built that momentum nicely, and then we saw what we saw, and then COVID hit, and it's kind of we've gone back down again. So we have to keep building up. So they're the two things that I would like to see within the women's game.
Lisa Caprini, hot Sthalekar. Thanks, Liz.
Nice.